Om Jnanatimirandhasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so today we will be continuing our discussion of chapter 3. Just before I fully go ahead, I hope the light in the back isn't disturbing anyone. And my room is a little bit messy. We're just getting ready to clean out the house to renovate a few things. So that's why it's a little bit chaotic behind me. So please don't be disturbed. So we were continuing on from chapter 3. So who can remember what were we discussing last week? Last week we had concluded the first half of chapter 3. Who can remember what was the first half of chapter 3 covering? Can anyone tell me? First, we have Arjuna. Yeah, you go.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So I think we were discussing about like being content with yourself. So a self-realized soul is not dependent on any other.
Yes.
Any other living entity. He doesn't have any affairs with the world, with the outside world. Yeah. So it's just that.
100%. So that was in the discussion of the as we were ending the first half. So what had happened was Krishna in the first half, Arjuna, he's confused, right? He's confused because he's hearing all of these different things. He's hearing all of these different messages from Krishna, and he's very, very confused. You're telling me to do jnana, and you're telling me to do karma. What am I meant to be doing, right? All of these things you're telling me, right? And so Krishna's response is, I'm actually not telling you to do many things. I'm telling you to do one thing, right? Which is renunciation. Bhakti has not yet fully come out in the text. We've had hints of bhakti, but we haven't had it fully come out yet, right? So he's telling him, karma, jnana, they are two different things, only in the sense that they are two stages, right? Doing your action and then renouncing it are just two different stages. They're two different platforms. They're two different qualifications for the one central goal of jnana, right? We've discussed this point a few times. There aren't multiple goals in the Gita. There aren't multiple paths. Actually, there's only two paths. There's jnana, renunciation, and there's bhakti. So Krishna now, he then speaks and he says, he makes two arguments. The first argument he makes of why Arjuna should engage in Nishkama Karma Yoga. The first one is that if you are not qualified for jnana, then you should do karma, right? These are only stages. Whenever we discuss karma in the Gita, we are only discussing jnana, right? Only jnana is being discussed because karma is just being discussed in terms of qualifying one for jnana, for renunciation. So Krishna, he's making the point, you're not qualified for this. Or if you're not qualified for this, then you should engage in karma in order to purify yourself. Having completed that, he then comes to, as Divyansh Prabhu has nicely pointed out, he comes to the point, even if you are qualified, even if you do have this level of understanding. And therefore he says, Yastvatma ratir eva syat, right? Yastva, yastu. Who can tell me what does yastu mean? It's in the word for word. So if you have your Gita open, this is text 17. Yastu.
One who?
One who.
Oh,
that's,
wait, no.
That's no, that's good. That's yaha. That's yes. And then what is tu? But. Very good. So, but one who. So Sanskrit is a little confusing with words like and but and or. You actually put them after the first word that they're modifying. That's why it's a janma karma cha, right? Janma karma cha. It's janma and karma, but the cha meaning and is put after the word. My Sanskrit teacher, he said it's like a hook. You should think of them like hooks. They hook onto the next word to connect them. They're not glue like in English. In English, they glue the words together, but in Sanskrit, they're like a hook. It hooks onto the word and then holds it on. Anyway, so that essentially means he's beginning with but, right? So we have a transition here. He's clearly transitioning to his other argument. And what does he begin his other argument with? Yastvatma ratir eva syad atmatriptash manavaha atmanyeva santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Okay, so we've already spoken these texts out, so we'll just go quickly through them. So he begins to discuss the one who is fully in that sense of self-realization, and then he'll make what argument? He'll make the argument even for such a person, they should still perform karma yoga in order to set a good example, right? So either way, right, and I believe it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he actually makes the point that in terms of pastime, Arjuna, he's kind of in between the two, right? He's not fully at that perfected stage, but he is, but he isn't exactly needing to purify himself too much, right? Which is one reason why Krishna is speaking both. Another reason why he's speaking both is just so that we can see the strength of the argument. Now, there's something to be said as we go deeper into this, because we'll start thinking, oh, well, then I will be practicing karma yoga, right? We'll start thinking this, right? Oh, I'm not so qualified. I will start practicing karma yoga. This is the right level for me. We need to not be in this mindset, and we will discuss why not as we get a little deeper into the texts. I'll save that maybe, but keep this in mind that the Gita is not, we will often think the Bhagavad-gītā is spoken for me, right? Because it's spoken for everyone. Srila Prabhupada, he makes that point in the purports, right? Krishna, he's speaking madhye in the middle of the armies, right? Why? Prabhupada says, so that everyone may benefit from the message of this Bhagavad-gītā, right? And that's correct. Krishna does speak so. However, doesn't mean that just because Krishna has spoken the Bhagavad-gītā for everyone, that he's spoken it to everyone. And this is a mistake that sometimes people will make, right? So they'll take any text in the Bhagavad-gītā and they'll say, well, this is directly spoken to me. No, the whole Bhagavad-gītā is directly spoken to Arjuna. And so we can't really forget that all of the words are being addressed to Arjuna for everyone, but not addressed to everyone, right? So sometimes when we have all of these glorifications of karma, right? Or there'll be this word, but for you, you should better do this. It is maybe inappropriate to say this applies to everyone. We should instead take the message of the words and those apply to everyone, right? And as we go through, we'll find that the message very much is to take up to bhakti. We'll discuss this a bit further on because it comes up in terms of the later texts, but I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. We will run into people who fit in all parts of the yoga ladder. However, we should not think as devotees. I was saying last week, Srila Prabhupada, he was once asked, what is the role of the Vaishnava in Varnashram? And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, why is he falling down, right? Already in bhakti, there's something much higher than all of these things, and we do not need to make ourselves too much concerned with the ins and outs of their execution. Rather, it's a better way of understanding the mentalities of different people, and maybe understand if we are maybe inappropriately acting on a lower platform than the bhakti platform. However, overall, we should remember all these encouragements for karma, they are there because this is the level Arjuna is at, right? If Arjuna was already fully renounced and everything, then maybe the Bhagavad-gītā would look a little bit different, right? Theoretically, there would be more encouragement towards jnana, right? But still the message would remain the same. Of course, the Bhagavad-gītā will always be like this, because even when it's spoken, as we'll discuss chapter 4, it's spoken to Vivaswan, who was also Kshatriya, right? So in general, it seems the Bhagavad-gītā is a real Kshatriya book, is a book for warriors. Okay, so having discussed that, let us continue going. So then we kept on going last week, and we got a little bit into the questions of setting the right example, right? We were talking about how Arjuna, he was wondering, right? Has anyone ever achieved perfection through such a process? And what does Krishna say? He says, kings such as Janaka attain perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your own work. Again, because he's said, right? We discussed there's so many different things that are symptomatic of the Atmarati, right? Our acharyas say the Atmarati, he is both satisfied and takes pleasure in himself. He is both Atmaram and I've forgotten the other word, right? He has all of these things, right? So the Atmarati, he is satisfied in the self only. And for him, there is no duty, right? Those are two symptoms. We also hear he has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor does he have any reason to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. So even with no requirement whatsoever to fulfill any duties, still he will do so. And this is the argument of the section. And kings such as Janak Maharaj, right? Kings such as him, they did this, and therefore they can be used as very authoritative examples. Srila Prabhupada, he also gives this example in regards to Krishna consciousness, right? Even for us as devotees, we can apply these general principles. Even if we are not practicing karma yoga, we can still apply this to ourselves, right? By leading by example, right? Not just in terms of being ethical, but also in terms of being devotional, right? In terms of being devotional, do we establish the right way? There's a very sweet pastime, Bhakti Charu Maharaj. I heard he was speaking in one class. He was saying about how in the early days there was a temple, right? And Srila Prabhupada, he was at the temple and he was seeing how everything was going, right? And seeing the condition of everything, maybe his disciples weren't doing the best job possible, right? And so Srila Prabhupada, he became very angry, right? He was chastising, not angry, but he was getting frustrated, right? What is the condition of everything? And he was speaking heavily to his disciples. This temple will not run if you're running it like this, right? And at the time, there was a new devotee, right? A new individual. He didn't really know much what was going on. And so he had been there the whole time, right? And he had been hearing the message, chant and be happy, right? All of these things. And so seeing Srila Prabhupada be very worked up and very frustrated with all his disciples, he went up to Srila Prabhupada and he said, Prabhu, maybe if you chant your rounds, it'll help you calm down a little bit. And what did Srila Prabhupada do? He chanted his rounds, right? This is the example, right? Prabhupada, it is not that he was acting out of a genuine anger, right? This was an anger used to motivate his disciples, right? To discipline his disciples. It wasn't a fault of his, right? But still, nevertheless, in order to set that good example, Srila Prabhupada said, yes, this is a good idea. So like this, we can find, even in devotional circles, we'll find this. Also, Jayananda Thakur, right? Such a famous devotee. It's often said that devotees, for those of you who don't know, Jayananda Thakur is the is the only disciple of Srila Prabhupada who Srila Prabhupada said, yes, he has gone back home, back to Godhead, right? He passed away before Srila Prabhupada ended his pastimes on earth. And every Ratha Yatra, we put his photo in the Rath because of how much seva he did to the Ratha Yatra. But I was hearing some memories of him. And everyone was saying, even though he was a temple president, whenever you would meet him, he would always introduce himself as the garbage man. Because he would take out the garbage every day. And he would say, even though he was actually the highest in the hierarchy, if you will, of the temple, he would always say, I'm the garbage man, right? In order to show that example, right? The example of not only of humility, but that this menial work, this simple work, this is the highest work. No one should feel above it, right? We are all being purified by throwing out the garbage and by washing the pots. This is where the real study is happening. This is where the real advancement in Krishna consciousness is happening. Anyway, so Prabhupada, he applies a lot of these principles to Krishna consciousness. I won't apply all of them from the purpose because unfortunately, we can't go as deep into the Bhagavad-gītā as we would like. So we're only getting a rough structure. And then, of course, Srila Krishna, he makes the famous text, whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. And we need not have too many examples of that. We see all sorts of stupid trends happen by all sorts of celebrities in the world today. And by setting a poor example, all sorts of terrible things happen, right? And then, O son of Pritha, there's no work prescribed to me within all the three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I any need to obtain anything. And yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. Here we find Krishna. What is he saying? Forget about the perfected soul who has no need to observe all of these duties anymore. Krishna never needed to. These duties come from Krishna. Krishna has defined these duties. Krishna has created these duties. And yet, Krishna, he also follows these duties for the same principle. So we'll find in the argument, Krishna, he's providing pramana, right? He's providing evidence, right? These are evidences that one should still continue to be a good example, even if perfected. And who is more perfect than Krishna, right? Who is more perfect than Krishna, right? So Krishna, he's objectively stated his argument. If I am doing this, then what do we speak of anyone else, right? I do not need anything, nor do I need to obtain anything. Krishna, he is fully self-satisfied. This is a complex point of philosophy, actually. And we will touch upon it, I think, maybe a little bit later on. But just remember it, that there's our Krishna conscious philosophy in very many ways is situated in this idea that he needs nothing, right? Nor does he need to obtain anything. Actually, I'll leave this as your homework. Maybe we can meditate upon this, right? During our week, think about it. Why would Krishna do anything if he doesn't need anything, nor does he need to obtain anything? You might say, oh, well, he needs to set a good example. But why does he bother manifesting all these material universes? Why does he bother having pastimes? Why does Krishna bother moving at all if he has everything he needs? Maybe just reflect on this as your homework. We won't answer it today, but just think about it. It almost makes no sense. Why would somebody who's fully satisfied do anything at all? So we can think about this. There's a deeper principle there. So there is no need for the Supreme Lord to perform any duty, and yet he still does. Why? For if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. And here we noted last week, right? How many Krishnas are there? Jaswant Prabhu, can you tell me how many Krishnas there are? Jaswant Prabhu. Oh, Jaswant Prabhu.
Hare Krishna,
Yes?
Prabhu, sorry.
No, all good. How many Krishnas are there?
If I'm not wrong, two Krishnas, Vrajanath Krishna and Dwarkanath Krishna.
Yes, very good, very good. That's exactly it. You'll find this with Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada, he mentions this in 10th canto, I forgot which purport, right? He mentions this. They're the two Krishnas, right? Because sometimes we might be confused, right? How can Krishna say this? We love Krishna because he breaks all the rules, not because he follows them. We love Krishna because he steals butter, right? We love Krishna because he is dancing around in the middle of the night, right? We love Krishna because he's doing all of these sort of things, right? So we should try to remember that there are two Krishnas, right? And does Vrajanath Krsna eat onion and garlic? No, even Vrajanath Krsna is not so bold, right? Eating onion and garlic. And no, I mean, I guess he doesn't. And we know that because the acharyas tell us not to offer that. So it seems to be outside of his palate, right? Otherwise, if the acharyas told us to offer that, then maybe he would. But he also doesn't eat spicy food. And out of, so I remember whenever all the brahmacharis were telling me that whenever senior pujaris come to the temple, whenever the pujaris come to the temple, they senior pujaris like from Mayapur or like Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu or Pankajangri Prabhu, whenever they come to ISKCON City and they have the Mahaprasad, they always say, if it's too spicy, they say, Krishna does not like this. Make it a little bit milder. Make it a little bit milder. Spicy is not, Krishna does not like to eat so spicy. Other modes of nature essentially what Krishna likes and dislikes? Yeah, you could say Krishna likes satwik food. If you're trying to say what causes what, I don't know. I think that's one of those we can just leave it up to the mystery of it, right? Is it that the modes are defined what Krishna likes? Maybe, or is it that Krishna likes a specific mode? Who knows? One of those inconceivable things. The modes have always existed and Krishna has always existed. So which direction that took, I'm not sure I could confidently answer that. Like Satwik Podmakari, yes. Yeah, actually, yeah, that one we can know for sure. Krishna, he saw all of the takeaways and he chose Satwik and Podmakari as the best one. No, so yeah, I'm not sure which order it is, but in some sort of relationship, there is, right? Krishna, he likes satwik food, and that's why we eat it. Often we'll say, oh, you know, vegetarian food this, vegetarian food that, and it's true, don't get me wrong, right? Vegetarianism is objectively the way to go, right? But with all sorts of arguments, right? And the ethical argument, I think, is always the strongest argument that is made, as powerful as the environmental and other arguments are. But ultimately, as we advance in our Krishna consciousness, at one point, it's just because, well, I want to share my meal with Krishna, and Krishna, he likes to eat vegetarian prasadam, right? And therefore, I eat it like this, right? It's all part of the devotional mood, right? I want to share my meal with the Supreme Personality. I want to share this meal with my dear friend Krishna, and therefore I eat in such a manner. Therefore, I cook in such a manner because I want to cook to feed my dearly beloved Krishna. And he doesn't want to eat anything else, so I will cook this, right? That is the deeper devotional mood, and that's why ultimately we cook like this. So a little tangential, but an important tangent to have. Ultimately, everything we do, what did we say? Actually, it's not too tangential. Atmarati, right? When one is on the devotional platform, one doesn't need to technically follow any of these rules, right? We no longer follow the rules because we have to, right? We no longer follow these rules in order that they are, that we do the right thing, right? We follow these rules only insofar that they can help us be closer to Krishna, right? That they are more pleasing to Krishna, that they help us get along better with Krishna. We don't actually care for the rules in any other manner, right? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says, if in my next life I'm a worm or if I'm Brahma, I don't care. Just let me be in the association of the devotees, right? This is the attitude that we sort of grow into in devotion, right? And this is why we don't speak much of piety or impiety, right? Not that in the name of devotion, we should become bad people, much the opposite. Devotion should melt our hearts so much. Dwarkanath Krishna for the other one. There's different ways these are named. This is just how I like to name them. I forgot the naming that Srila Prabhupada uses in 10th canto, but you hear people using all sorts. Some people who say Vrajendrananda. No, some people say Nanda Krishna, Nanda Nandan, and some say Vasudev Krishna, right? So they'll say it based on the parent, right? They'll say the son of Nanda Maharaj, and others will say the son of Vasudev. I like to say which place they rule in, but really you'll find all sorts of different ways. There's no hard and fast rules, as long as you get the message, right? One is born from Vasudeva and ruling in Dwarka, and the other one is born from Nanda Maharaj and ruling in Vrindavan. Yeah, so what was I coming to? Yeah. So those are the two Krishnas. That's why sometimes it can be confusing. We very much can feel this is Dwarkanath Krishna coming out, right? Not the breaker of rules, but the king, right? Although even Dwarkanath Krishna, he has still has that sweetness. Dwarkanath Krishna, he runs away from battle. He flees like a coward, and and we can consider this actually to be his glorious sweetness. Okay, so for if I ever failed to engage carefully in performing my prescribed duties, certainly all men would follow my path. And again, I mentioned last week, this is why we don't describe the really intimate pastimes of Krishna openly, right? Because the average person, they'll become confused, right? And you'll have all sorts of maybe we'll know of the Prakrita Sahajiyas, right? The Sahajiyas, they will do all sorts of perverted things, actually, trying to imitate Krishna, right? That's why Prabhupada, he makes the point, right? First, you carry Govardhan Hill, and then you imitate these intimate pastimes of Krishna. But we don't broadcast them, because the average person doesn't think that way. I still remember when I was flying to India, and I was arriving in Delhi, and I was, trying to, I was in Delhi airport on my way to Vrindavan. This is just before my initiation. And I remember the customs guy, right? He was actually really nice, right? He could tell I was a devotee with the neck beads and everything. And so he was talking to me, and he said, "Oh, you're going to Vrindavan?" And I said, yes, I'm going to Vrindavan. And then he said, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend?" I still don't know why he asked that, but he asked that, and I said, no, I don't. And then he said, "Oh, why not? Krishna, he had so many girlfriends, right?" And so we see, right? People do have this general mindset. I saw in front of me, I thought, here we find the exact embodiment, right, of Krishna's words here, right? People will appeal to it. More times than you'd imagine, people will say, "Show me where Krishna was vegetarian, and then I will become vegetarian," right? Of course, if you showed them that Krishna was vegetarian, they still wouldn't be, because they're just being rascals. But irregardless, right? People appeal to Krishna like this. And therefore we have, because people would very openly speak about the 10th canto esoteric mysteries, we would have the Prakrita Sahajiyas. Mrugank, if you want to note about the Prakrita Sahajiyas, they're examples of text 23 going AWOL. The Prakrita Sahajiyas, they do all sorts of really weird things. I don't want to get into the details because it's a little bit uncomfortable. They're very perverse, right? But what they would do, especially there was a few sub-camps, some of them, they would dress up like Krishna, right? And other ones, they would dress up like gopis, and they would just have illicit sexual relations, right? That's what they would do. And the guy, he would say, "Oh, I'm Krishna," right? And all the others, they'd say, "Oh, I'm the gopis," right? So completely perverse, right? Completely misunderstanding. But they would think, right? Oh, this is the way. And they would meditate, and they would say, while engaging in these activities, I am experiencing Goloka. This is Krishna Prem, right? My sense gratification is Krishna Prema. Like this, they would say, this is my meditation. So these people, very good. They want to be like Vrajanath Krishna. First, they should lift Govardhan like Vrajanath Krishna did. And then they can do all of these things. But they will never be able to, right? So therefore, they should never even attempt, right? This is how we can find Krishna. He does these pastimes to make it clear, right? Do not follow this path, because I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead and you are not, right? So we find here lots of very valid examples of this principle. It's not just that Krishna, he's saying some theoretical thing. We can see this is happening very much in the world. And therefore, the next text, if I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all beings. And there we come up. This is where we got up to last week. So now we've recapped. And there's one specific word. Who can remember what is the word I really wanted to draw attention to in this text? Who remembers? There's one specific word which gives this passage very specific relevance.
Sankarasya.
Yes, Sankarasya. Who can tell me, what does Sankarasya mean? Maybe I'll call somebody out. I hope you all have your Gitas in front of you. Maybe Mrunal Mataji. Can you tell us what Sankarasya means?
Very one.
All good. While Mrunal Mataji looks, it's always, I find reading the word for word is very nectar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So you go.
Unwanted population.
Unwanted population. And what does that remind us of? What does Sankarasya remind us of? We made this point last week. Who can remember? Maybe Katyayani Mataji, do you remember?
Am I audible, Prabhu?
Yes, yes.
So from the first chapter, we discussed about the Varna Sankara.
Yes, exactly, right? Yeah, so we were discussing that. Thank you. So this is coming back because it's not that Arjuna speaks all his arguments and then Krishna says to him about the soul and he forgets it, right? It's not like he's totally just ignored him, talked past him, like, yeah, whatever. Here you go. This is the soul. This is this. This is that. Now go fight Arjuna. He's engaging with his reasoning, right? And so this section especially, texts 17 to 35, they are all sort of coming back to addressing this point. Arjuna, if you abandon your duty, then society will go to ruination, right? Then it'll go to ruination. And we see that happening to today, right? How many people today are happily following their duties in society, right? How many people are feeling these days, right? How high is the divorce rate, right? And of course, there's some times where maybe we can say there's legitimate reasons, right? I don't think anyone's saying in abusive situations that you know, oh, just write it out, right? It's not that we should be impractical, but when you look at the statistics, most of the time it's just, oh, you know, wasn't feeling it anymore, so boom, done, gone, right? This is the situation, right? We see all sorts of other things, right? Oh, the biggest one nowadays, if somebody is pregnant, they don't want the child, boom, we'll just kill it, right? No sense of duty or responsibility. The complete opposite now, right? So with all of that gone, right? With all of that gone, we can also see, right? So many societal issues are being caused by this complete disintegration of responsibility and duty. Again, it's very practical. The Bhagavad-gītā is describing the real world, right? It's not some theoretical, nodding off into the distance, right? All of these are very real issues that we very really are seeing before us. And therefore, Sankarasya, right? Because what is Krishna's point? Krishna's point is that unless you do your duty, then you'll have people who aren't doing their duty. And when you have people who aren't doing their duty, more damage will be caused, more violence will be caused. And I use the example of, we can say, religious violence, right? Religious violence today is justified by people thinking, oh, we can just bend the rules, right? Bend the rules a little bit. Let's do this nasty thing, that nasty thing, right? All sorts of terrible acts are done in the name of religion because the whole idea is we need to take, we can bend the rules because it's desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And Krishna, he's saying this will all happen. If you do not strictly follow your duty, then other people will think it's appropriate for them to follow your duty, and it is never appropriate for them to do so. And therefore, we will cause all problems in society. So therefore, Krishna, he has very nicely refuted Arjuna's argument. By doing one's societal responsibility, society will not go into decay. But by giving up one's societal duty, then very much this will be the case. Okay, then we come now to text 25 to 29. Text 25 to 29, they are now a different section. This this whole part breaks very easily into sections. We have 17 to 24, then we have 25 to 29, then we have 30 to 35, and then we have 36 to 42, 43. I forgot what the last text of the chapter is, right? So it all brackets off very well. And what do we hear in text 25? As the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. So Krishna, he's still making the same overall argument. It's not that we've come into a brand new section. This is just a subsection, if you will, of the previous one. And it's tying in the question of the two categories of people, right? There are two categories that have been discussed. There is the ignorant and there is the knowledgeable, right? Or rather, there is the person who is not qualified to act, right? On the higher platform, the person who is, right? So we're discussing the person from the first half of the chapter who needs to be purified. And we're also discussing the person from the second half, the one who does not, but still acts according to regulative principles. So these two people are being contrasted, right? And in their contrast, we will find Krishna, he will further his argument, right? We can say that the ignorant is maybe the karma kandi and the detached worker is the karma yogi, right? So here we find in text 25, we find them very, we'll find them very much defined. So as the ignorant performs their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. Then text 26 gives us a second theme. So actually we can say that texts 25 to 29, so 27, 25, 27, 28, they differentiate the two types of people. But texts 26 and 29, they describe how they interact, right? So we're going to read these out of order. So please concentrate, get ready to flick through your Gita. Firstly, we're going to discuss the differences. So firstly, we'll discuss 25, 27, and 28, right? And then we'll go in depth in order. So 27 says the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities. Oh, Mrugank, we've lost your screen. Oh, it's back. They think themselves the doer, right? Of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. We all know the three modes of material nature, right? Goodness, passion, ignorance, sattva, rajas, tamas. The way I always say to remember which one correlates with which is with music. Classical music is in the mode of goodness. Rock and roll or pop music is in the mode of passion, and death metal is in the mode of ignorance. So that's how I always try to, that's how I differentiate the three. So yeah, that's how I find that's the way I remember what are the characteristics of each one. Of course, in the 17th chapter, we'll maybe find some more elevated examples, right? But for now, we can roll with those definitions. So prakrite kriyamanani gunnai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham mitti manyate. Maybe Nicole, do you have the Gita in front of you to read the English from?
Yep, I do.
So that's text 27.
The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Jai.
So this text is one of your shlokas for memorization. So just noting that. Just another reminder, please start memorizing your shlokas just for your own well-being and mental health. I can from personal experience say that, you know, memorizing all of the shlokas the day before is not the most pleasant experience you'll have in your life. So here we find there is a question that's asked, right? Arjuna, he's wondering. And what is he wondering? He's wondering, what is the difference then between the karma yogi and the conditioned fool, right? If they're both acting in the same way, right? If the ignorant, yes, boiled milk in the afternoon. Prabhupada would always say, don't drink cold milk at night. I don't know why. So definitely make sure it's warm. And put some cardamom and turmeric in it as well for the full Vedic experience. Yes, so Arjuna, he's wondering, if they're both acting the same way, then what's the difference, right? They're both acting the same way. What actually distinguishes them? And so in text 27, Krishna, he answers this, right? He says the ignorant person, right? Vimudha atma, right? Ahankara vimudhatma, right? What does he think? Kartaham miti manyate. Actually, if you understand some basic Sanskrit, this is actually really it's really poetic and pretty. This shlok is really nicely put together. It flows really, really nicely. And so he's saying, what is the difference? Well, one, he is bewildered by the three modes of material nature. And the other one, he is not. This is the difference, right? He thinks that he is the doer, and the other one thinks he is not, right? It is the three modes of material nature that they are the ones that are carrying out activity. In the next text, which is also discussing the differences, tattva vit tu mahabaho guna karma vibhagayoho guna guneshu vartanta iti matva nasajjate. Maybe we can have Rani Mataji. Would you like to read out the English?
Yep. One who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, Almighty An, does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, knowing well the differences between work in devotion and work for fruitive results.
Yes, right. So they understand the differences between the two forms of activity, right? And therefore, there is a strong difference. So now I just want to focus on a little tangent from the central argument, because people often will get their philosophy a little confused at this point, right? People will hear this, right? People think that they are the doer activities, so you are not the doer, right? That's what people will say. You are not the doer of activities because there are three modes of material nature carrying them out. If we can go to the notes, I'm about to, normally it's listed that there are various factors, if you will. There are various factors in action, right? And so it's said that the three modes, they're the ones that are acting, right? You have the three modes, you have the demigods, you have the senses, and you have the sense objects. Those are the ones that are normally listed, right? So those ones interacting with each other, they're normally the ones that drive material existence, right? Because what happens, the three modes, they define the way your senses work, right? So maybe your eye is in the mode of passion, right? And of course, by the senses, we mean the subtle part of the mind. Yes, please, Mrugank, if you could go to the notes to write these down, these factors, I think.
Oh, my notes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I meant the notes on the screen. Yes, thank you. We're writing in text 27 to 28, the different factors, right, that drive activity. So your eye might be in the mode of passion, right? And therefore you see an object, right, which is in the mode of passion as well, right? And therefore you're attracted to it, and therefore you do it, right? You take that object, whatever it is, right? Maybe you're in the mode of goodness, right? And then you see something that's in the mode of goodness, and therefore you do in the mode of goodness, right? And as we go deeper, and we'll discuss the different types of senses and all, because senses are a complex thing, right? So the four factors of the three modes, the demigods, the senses, and the sense objects. So these factors, they drive all activity. So what is the difference? The fool, he sees all of these things and he says, I am doing this. All of the activities he is performing, he says, I am doing this. This is me who is doing that. When my body, they are like the person, right? When a person cuts down a tree with an axe, they are thinking, I'm the one cutting down the tree. But no, it's the axe that's cutting down the tree, right? They are wielding the axe, but it is not them who has created, you know what I mean, who's created the holes in the tree, right? Kartaham iti manyate, right? This is what they are thinking. This is the difference. Now, the little tangent I just want to go on is sometimes people, they'll hear this and they'll think, oh, well, we are all determinists, right? Whatever you do is already, you have no control, you have no free will, right? Because you're not the doer, right? You can see how sometimes people, they'll become confused. If you're not the doer, if everything is just being carried out by material nature, people will think, oh, well, so everything is predetermined, right? And actually there's some Vedic schools that think this way, but we do not. Because the point isn't that you have no influence over what happens. You actually do. The soul, when it expresses its desire, consciousness, when it expresses its attraction, this is the way that the free will is being expressed, right? We still have some will. What is being condemned here is not the idea that, oh, you have any influence over your activities. What is being condemned here is thinking that all of your activities, the things that are carrying them out, that they are you. They are not you, right? They are the material, they are the senses, the sense objects like this, right? They're all of these things, right? Your body in the three modes. This is what is carrying out the action. So kartaham iti manyate, it is not, if he said karta iti manyate, I am doing, that would not be foolish. But to say kartaham, right? This is me and I am doing it, right? This is the foolish thing, right? To identify with it, to have ahankar, right? Ahankar means aham, I, and kar, right? The thing by which I express my I-ness, right? And I'm expressing it incorrectly. So there is free will, right? If any of you read the philosophy of the Tattvavadis, the other followers of Madhvacharya, the Dvaita Vedantists, as they're sometimes called, they actually believe that. They say there's no real free will. So they say there's three types of jivas, there's three types of souls, those which are already in the spiritual world, those which are in the material world and will go to the spiritual world, and those which will always be in the material world. And they can never change. They're cursed like that forever. They're the, if you will, the Calvinists of the Vedantic world, right? So this is not a philosophy that we take. I just want to clarify that, because sometimes, you read that and you can sometimes, how good are Calvinists? No, Calvinists are not, they're a little bit, if any of you don't know, Calvinists are a Christian group, a Christian philosophy, and they think that, that they say, heaven and hell are forever, and that God, before he creates the world, he chooses some souls he wants to destroy forever and some souls he wants to save forever, right? And there's no free will. It's already been pre-chosen, and God just gets a real kick out of torturing some people forever and not torturing the others. So it's a little bit of an odd philosophy, right? And we definitely don't ascribe to the Vedic version of that. Okay, so that's the first thing to be discussed. Secondly, I want to quickly touch, and we will touch on this more in the later chapters, especially in the 5th chapter, but we are not dualists in that we say that the soul has nothing to do with the body, right? So we often think of dualism, right? That the soul has nothing to do with the body, right? You'll sometimes hear an impersonalist sometimes will say, My soul has as much to do with this body as it has to do with that tree over there, right? Look, I'm happy you're not this body, seriously, but maybe you're taking it a bit too far, right? Seriously, but definitely a bit too far. The body does relate to the soul because the body is an expression of the soul's desires, right? Just because you're not the soul doesn't mean the soul has no specific relationship to the body, right? It just means that they are two separate forms of energy, right? One is a material energy and one is the tatastha, marginal energy, okay? So they don't ever touch, they don't ever have contact. Your soul never actually touches your body in a sense, right? Because they're two different categories, right? It's sort of like on a three-dimensional axis, right? Depending on which angle you look, it looks like one dot might be covering the other dot. But if you change the angle, the dots are separate. If that doesn't make any sense, just ignore that analogy because I'm about to use a second one that might make more sense if that one didn't make sense to you. It's also like a magnet, right? A magnet, I don't know how many of you did, I'm sure you would have all done this in high school in science, right? You take the iron filings, right? And even if there's a layer of plastic in between the iron filings and the magnet still moves the iron filings, right? The iron never comes into contact with the iron, but it does have a relationship to the iron, right? And it does determine the direction the iron moves in, and it does have a specific relationship with those iron filings that it does with any other ones. And the way that the magnet moves its attraction does determine the way that the iron filings move. So even though we are dualists, we also aren't dualists in the sense that some people are, right? Some people are dualists and they'll say the soul has nothing to do with the body, right? But we would say the soul does have something to do with the body, even though you are not this body, right? And eventually you do become a body that you are, right? Souls are meant to be embodied, right? It's not that we go back home, back to Godhead, and we're just some random blob of consciousness floating in the spiritual world, right? This is Mayavad, right? We will have a body in the spiritual world, but it'll be a spiritual body, right? It'll be, and that body you will be. Then you'll be able to say, instead of preaching to people, you're not this body, in the spiritual world, you'll be preaching to people, you are this body, right? And the reason why is because the soul is eternal and this body is not eternal, right? Yes, as Alex says, the famous C.S. Lewis quote, right? We aren't bodies who have souls, we are souls who have bodies, right? And these bodies aren't who we truly are because they are temporary, they come and go, right? But we do not come and go, right? But those spiritual bodies, they will be there forever, right? Because they are composed of the same substance our souls are composed of. They are Satchidananda, right? Okay, so these are two specific points. They may be a little tangential to Krishna's argument, but we need to remember them because otherwise, if you don't have them clarified, you can sort of get confused about our philosophy, right? Okay, so now that we've discussed that, so Krishna, he said these things in order to clarify, in order to clarify all sorts of things. Now, as we go back now, as I said, very confusingly, now we're going to discuss texts 26 and 29. So we'll go back to text 26. Na buddhi bhedam jannayed agyanam karma sanginam joshayet sarva karmani vidvan yukta samacharan. Maybe Alex, would you like to read out the translation? This is text 26.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness.
Jai, yes, yes, he should. So we find here a very important activity, which is also echoed in text 29. So we'll read text 29 as well, and we'll deal with the two texts together. Prakriter guna sammudha sajante guna karmasu tan akritsna vido mandan kritsna vinna vichalayet. And then maybe we can have Divyansh Prabhu read the English here.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare.
Sorry. Yeah. So 327, right?
Yeah.
So the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Hare
Yes. Hare Krishna. So, oh, actually, it's 11:02. We'll make a slight point and then we'll continue this point after the break. I'll just make one point. And that point is a very brief one, so only 1 minute, and then we'll head off to a break. That point is that this here is referring to karma yoga and jnana yoga. It is not necessarily referring to bhakti yoga, okay? Our acharyas make this point. It also applies to bhakti yoga in a sense, but it also does not, right? In one sense, it applies to in order how to maybe maturely and appropriately deal with people. But in terms of being a strict prohibition against preaching, it does not apply. How those nuances get carried out, we'll say for after the break. So I'll see you all at 11:07. You can think about that, right? Or why are they distinct? How can it apply and how can't it apply, etc., etc. Or you can just have a break, like up to you. Okay, I'll see you all in 5 minutes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hey,
Yeah.
oh no, I had a question for the notes. So.
Okay, so we've got these two here, right? And it's constantly talking about what? It's talking about how one does not disturb the other, right? This is the theme that ties them together. Now, firstly, as I said, this primarily refers to the jnana yogi, right? So the one who is on the path of jnana, he should not really disturb or influence the person who's absorbed in karma kanda, right? So it's not that if one, the example that's given in, I think, Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, he says, it's not that the renounced sannyasi should go up to the person performing like Vedic sacrifices and tell him, oh, you know, this is all nonsense, blah, 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 renounce the world like me, right? This is what he's saying. And also we find this principle is good in general, right? My mother, in the few decades, right, that she's been in the Krishna conscious movement, she's seen lots of people come and go, right? And she always tells me the number one indicator when somebody comes and then definitely goes is when they burn out, is when they're coming in at a bajillion%. You know, they're coming in so flaming, renouncing the whole world. You know, they're the next Prabhupada, you know, like they have that sort of attitude. And then in a few months, boom, gone, blooped, right? Because if there's this artificial renunciation, it's never really healthy, right? So the general principle here is that artificial renunciation is not good. And if you encourage it, well, it's going to cause issues, right? If you really, really try to push. And I guess that's the central theme of the whole Gita, really, you know what I mean? That, of course, the central theme is to become a devotee, right? The central theme is to take up to devotional service. But the way that it's presented that's unique to the Bhagavad-gītā is it's very much calling for sincerity of the individual, right? Be who you are. And I don't mean that in a like you know, middle-aged mum WhatsApp group sort of like message way. I mean that in a I mean that it's a very much a call to sincerity. There shouldn't be any falsehoods. There shouldn't be any attempt to artificially construct an identity that we're not, right? We're not trying to pretend to be anything that we're not. We're trying to be realistic about where we are, being realistic again about doubts in the case of Arjuna, being realistic about our qualification, and Krishna speaking about the different levels of qualification and act on that qualification. And that's fine because it's all a ladder up, right? All of this is there. Don't do that which is not yours. Do that which is yours, right? Be who you are, not in a you know, I'm sure, at least those of us who went to school in Australia, you know how they always got the motivational speakers to come and speak to us. And the only reason why it was nice is we didn't have to go to class that session, right? But the rest of it was just standard, you know, be who you are, follow your dreams, yada, yada, nothing like that, but in a much deeper way, right? We're not here to disrupt people to artificially pretend to be who they're not. That's not what Krishna consciousness is. And that's not what the message of the Bhagavad-gītā is. And so often people can think that's what it is, right? Especially I know among youth, it's such a common thing, right? For all of us, right, who've grown up in the movement, you know, this is temple me and this is outside temple me, right? And temple me is a pure devotee, right? Who chants 64 rounds before breakfast, and you know what I mean, right? And then when you're outside the temple, you're a completely different person, right? And so there's all of these things, right? The way that Maya is constructed, the way that society is constructed, and this is true of everyone, not just the youth, right? I'm just saying that because that's something that's from my own personal experience, right? But so often we see that, right? There's all of these different identities constructed, and even among other devotees, right? We always want to, there's a part of us that wants to act like I am a very renounced devotee, or let's not have this person think lowly of me, you know, and we want to construct this image, right? It's all image building. But the Bhagavad-gītā very much cuts past that. Let's just be real. Let's just be who we are, and then constructively work towards growing deeper and deeper in Krishna consciousness, because you won't fake it till you make it. Krishna consciousness does not work like that. So we find this is a recurring theme actually in the Gita. Why should we artificially push somebody to a level that they're not? There was a point, but it slipped my mind completely. So if I remember it, I'll come back to it in a second. Okay, yeah. But this also applies specifically to jnana, because jnana, what is the point I've been making this whole time? What is karma? What does karma mean? When we hear discussions of karma in the Bhagavad-gītā, what do we mean? What are we talking about? Who can tell me? Is karma being discussed as a goal in of itself? Big no. I hope you're all shaking your head. Karma, big no. Big no to karma being something discussed by itself. Who can tell me? What is karma being discussed to? Karma is the path to, maybe Vidhi Mataji. What is karma? Karma is the path to?
To Gyan.
Gyan, exactly, right? So why is karma the path to Gyan? Because jnana requires you to be purified before you engage in it, right? It is very hard to meditate and very hard to study, right? How many of us would be devotees if all that happened was you had a Gita in front of you, you got sat down, no prasadam, no singing, no dancing, nothing of that. You just have a Gita put in front of you and you say, and you read it, right? And now read it and sit down and realize you're not this body, right? Mindfulness meditation is like gym, right? We see mindfulness meditation is really spreading really popularly in the West now, right? But it's exactly like the gym, you know? Everyone, the majority of people who do it, they'll do it as their New Year's resolution and give up like a few weeks in. Very few people keep to the habit, right? Because it is a very difficult habit, right? There's certain purification that needs to come before one. And of course, mindfulness meditation is just a drop in the ocean of jnana yoga, how complex it is, right? Study of books is only a drop in the ocean of how complex this is. There's a lot of purification that needs to happen before it. So artificial renunciation is even more volatile, even more dangerous on the path of jnana yoga. And therefore, a sannyasi on the path of jnana yoga does not disturb the person doing sacrifices. He does not go to the grihastha performing his sacrifices and say, oh, these are all foolish, you know, there's no fruits in this, right? Renounce all of this, become renounced from reality. He doesn't say that. He knows that gradually by the person's execution of this karma kanda, eventually he will become to realize the nature of this world and he will slowly become renounced and qualified for jnana. Now, our acharyas, even though that principle of false renunciation is very valid to bhakti, right? And therefore we find Srila Prabhupada, right? He very much applies this, right, to Krishna consciousness. And he does so practically, right? He says, men who are ignorant cannot appreciate activities in Krishna consciousness. And therefore, Lord Krishna advises us not to disturb them and simply waste valuable time, right? So Srila Prabhupada, he applies this to Krishna consciousness. He does a slightly different take, okay? So he says all of this is talking about Krishna consciousness, but Krishna is wrong here. The devotees are more kind than the Lord because they understand the purpose of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada says, even if Krishna is advising this, we understand that the devotees are even more merciful than the Lord himself. And so they will do so anyways. Consequently, they undertake all kinds of risks, even to the point of approaching ignorant men to try to engage them in acts of Krishna consciousness, which are absolutely necessary for the human being. So this prohibition, it is wise, it is valuable, and it is also relevant to Krishna consciousness. However, be it as there may some risk, and as much as we should keep that risk on board, we should never let that risk prevent us from telling somebody about Krishna, right? And again, it is not that we are engaging in some sort of proselytization. It's not that we're trying to forcefully or pressure people or even seek people to quote unquote convert. The preaching of Krishna consciousness is merely the proclamation that Krishna is the all attractive, and look how beautiful he is, and look how much joy there is in his service, right? We hear the word preaching, and sometimes we'll hear lots of connotations of join my religion is better, your than religion. What does Srila Prabhupada say? All this question of all the religions, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, it is all false religion. Actually, Srila Prabhupada, he says this, all is bogus religion, actually. True religion is God, Krishna. He is so beautiful and you should love him. This is true religion. Anything else is bogus religion, right? So it is not a question of tribalism. Come join my tribe, you join, you leave your tribe, you join my tribe. This is not what preaching is. Preaching is how beautiful is Krishna and how joyous is devotional service. So what is the point here? And our acharyas, they quote lots of pramana to say, this is only the case because there needs to be so many qualifications for Jnana Yoga, but there is no qualification required for Bhakti Yoga except that you have received the mercy of the devotees. Once you have received the mercy of the devotees, you are qualified to perform Bhakti Yoga no matter who you are. And therefore, even though there is some risk, there may be some disruption in one's renunciation in Bhakti Yoga, there's never any risk. And therefore, this does not apply to our Sankirtan, right? Even though in a sense we do this, right? When we're out doing Sankirtan book distribution, right? They touch the book first, right? They're purified by touching a Gita, right? On Sankirtan, often there's singing that goes alongside the book distribution. Although interestingly enough, Srila Prabhupada, he writes in one letter, who can tell me if there is one person once asked, we don't have enough manpower to distribute books and do the singing of the holy names. Which one should we keep on doing? Who can guess which one did Srila Prabhupada say must be kept doing?
Distribution of books?
Yes. Srila Prabhupada said, if there's no one to play mridanga, then sing without mridanga. If there's just kartals and singing. If there's nobody to play kartals, then just have singing and book distribution. And if there's no one to do both singing and book distribution, then keep the book distribution going. Anyways, so they're purified anyways, right? And that's enough purification. There's one story, Purna Chandra Goswami, he says this story. There was this one person and he was speaking to this devotee, right? And he asked, the question, oh, how did you come to Krishna consciousness? Maybe one day in the coming weeks, we can have an activity and we can discuss, we can share our experiences like that. So he was asking him, and he said, actually, what he did is he used to be in like one of those Eastern European countries, right? So he had a lot of the atheist propaganda. So this was after all of the communist regime fell, but he was very much still influenced by that. So he completely hated seeing the devotees, right? He would think, oh, these idiots, this and that. And what he would do is when the devotees would show him a book, he would take the book and he would rip the pages out in front of them, right? And then doing that, he would then go to another point. And if the devotees came again and it was a new set, he would play innocent, and the devotees would come and they'd give him the book. And they would say, for a small donation, we're giving these books out. Just, in Australia, we say just one gold coin, right? And so they would say like that. And he would say, oh, but you've already given it to me. And then he would take it and then he would rip the pages out again, right? So not exactly a good person. But at one point, somehow or another, he just felt completely bad and he had a complete change of heart. And he became a devotee. And not only did he become a devotee, he actually became a brahmachari and eventually took sannyas, right? And he says that it really, for him, he can't see any reason why he had this change of heart, except that he simply was touching the books, right? So like this, it's so easy to actually become qualified in a sense with bhakti. Simply, we just come into contact with the devotees who are so in love with Krishna, and we just can't help but think, well, you know, I want to be in love with Krishna too. So like this, there's no question of purification needed. Simply take to Krishna consciousness. And so our acharyas even quote Sridhar Swami. He has a commentary on the teachings of Rishabhdev. And they quoted, and actually far from being an issue, here we find that it's an issue to preach jnana yoga, right? To the unrenounced person, right? To the karmakandi, right? But he says, even though that is the case, it is the opposite. It is an issue if you are not explaining the glories of bhakti yoga, how bhakti is beyond all mundane material questions of piety and everything. Because bhakti is transcendental to all of that. And because it is transcendental to all of that, therefore it is perfectly fine to proclaim it to anyone and everyone, right? And actually it is a sin not to. He says it is sinful to see a person and to tell them, yes, keep trying to earn your way up, keep trying to do good things and live your life out in that way, right? No, it is a sin to do that. You must tell them, chant the holy names, right? You must tell them how beautiful is Krishna, because if you engage in bhakti, then you can be relaxed. There is no loss or diminution. There is only loss in the path of karma, but there is only gain in the path of bhakti. And so we should proclaim that, right? Again, not forcefully. Sometimes I'll use the word preach, but we have to make sure we don't carry the Western baggage of the word preach as being, you know, seeking out converts. That's not what we mean by preaching. Okay, so I think then we'll go to text 30 and 35, just so that we can finish. Sorry, I don't think we'll have an activity today, just after the monster mega activity we had last week. I want to get the third chapter done today. So we've concluded this. And now we are going to hear text 30 to 35. Text 30 to 35 are sometimes described, even though they are describing Nishkama Karma Yoga, they are also sometimes described as being, if we can say the second chapter had some drops of bhakti, this is now maybe a bucket full of bhakti. We aren't yet in the ocean of bhakti, that's the middle six, but we are getting there, right? And so we'll find that's why Srila Prabhupada has these nectarianly long purports. So what do we have? We have text 30, and text 30 is very important. What does Srila Prabhupada say? Srila Prabhupada, he says, this verse clearly indicates the purpose of the Bhagavad-gītā. And what is that text? Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasyadhyatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigata jaraha. Who have I not called upon to speak? Tarun Prabhu. I think we haven't asked Tarun Prabhu to say the English today.
Yes, Prabhu. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from the lethargy, fight.
Jai, right? So now he's coming to the conclusion, right? Or rather, he's coming very explicitly. And again, we have to clarify, as always, and I'm going to stop clarifying in 24/7, but I'm just going to do it one last time. When we say he's fighting, we have to remember the Bhagavad-gītā is written for us, not to us. It is spoken for us, not to us. Krishna is not saying engage everyone in violence, and he's not even saying always, if you can engage in violence, do engage in violence. In this specific example, Arjuna, not on a personal level, but as somebody who is there to enforce the proper maintenance of society, he must fight in self-defense. We cannot forget, right, the context of this. If we do, we will misread the Gita and we will read it inappropriately. The Gita is thoroughly a text of ahimsa, but I like to call it pragmatic ahimsa. It is not an idealistic ahimsa, but rather an ahimsa that is actually trying to maximize the ahimsa we have available, if this makes sense. Because again, if this is not followed, then more violence will occur, because people will start thinking, well, if Arjuna can give up violence whenever he wants, we can take it up whenever we want, right? And we also need to remember Yudhishthira Maharaj, just before this fighting, he's still trying to negotiate peace, right? And this is being done in an act of pure self-defense after Draupadi has virtually been, what we would consider in modern language, we would consider sexual assault, right? All of these terrible things have been done. They've nearly been killed. And even then, they're still trying to negotiate some sort of peaceful way of administering justice. And it's not being done as a personal vendetta, but instead by the natural, but in order to maintain societal harmony in the same way that we will have a police force, right? Okay, I always feel the need to clarify that. I will stop doing it so often, but it's important to remember, especially these days, you'll find people actually quoting the Gita saying, we should do this, we should do that. And it's like, if you're quoting the Gita and saying anything else, then therefore we should chant Hare Krishna and talk about Krishna, you've missed the point, okay? Yeah, okay. So, therefore, Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight, okay? So here we find, again, as Srila Prabhupada says, the full message of the Bhagavad-gītā, right? So one should offer all the activities with full knowledge and dependence, without personal desires, without a sense of proprietorship, and free from lethargy. Then what do we find in the next text? Following on from this. Yebe matam midam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shraddhavanto nasuyanto muchyante te karma bihi. Maybe then we can have Shavina Mataji maybe read out the English.
Those persons who execute their duties according to my junctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from the bondage of fruitative actions. Thank you.
So here we find very nicely this word satyam, right? Those who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from the bondage of fruitive activities. So here we find, oh wait, is the word nityam here? Yes. So nityam is mentioned in the word for word. Again, I say reading the word for word, you get a lot out of it, right? So nityam, this means constantly doing it, right? It is constant or it is eternal, right? We find a few things here. One is that we should always be engaged. It's not nityam bhagavata sevaya, right? It's not that we think I've chanted my 16 rounds and now I'm allowed to play video games. We are constantly trying to engage ourselves in memory of the Supreme Lord. But also nityam is starting to indicate something. Even though in context, Krishna here, he is describing Nishkama karma yoga, right? He is describing that. Here we find again, this is the subtle bucketful of bhakti yoga, because one's nitya duty, one's eternal duty is actually not to fight, nor is it to be a father, nor is it to be a mother, nor is it to be anything. One's eternal duty is to be Krishna Das, to be the devotee of Krishna, right? So we will take this hint and we will develop it out definitely in text 35. But I'm going to keep on going. Then text 32. Ye tve tad abhyusuyanto nanutishtanti me matam sarvagyana vimudhanstan vidhi nashtan nachetasaha. Maybe let's have Shivam Prabhu.
But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection.
Yes. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Again, I would love to go into all of the little nuances of every text, but unfortunately we can't. Then let's do text 33 and 34. They're interesting because in text 33 we hear sadrisham chetashte swasyaha prakrite jnanavanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. For everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish, right? So here we hear, right? Just the principle I've been discussing already, right? What is a point of repression? What is a point of acting like we are not? It accomplishes nothing. We should act according to our nature. This is in many ways the specific way that the Bhagavad-gītā is presenting this transcendental knowledge. And this applies on the nature of the soul, and also for those who are not on the transcendental platform, those who are conditioned under the three modes, right? Prabhupada, he describes this in the purport. Therefore, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or by separating the soul from the body, right? So even with knowledge, you are bound by this. Only by the point of realization can you escape from this. So why would you just pontificate without that realization? Now, one may ask the question, if one has knowledge of the Shastras, but even that knowledge doesn't help you break the cycle, then what is the point of the Shastras altogether? And because of that, we have then text 34. Indriyasyendriyasyarthe ragadvesha vyavastito tayornavasham agachet tau hyasya paripantitno. Let's have Bhumi-gītā Mataji. Would you like to read out text 34?
Yes, Prabhu. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. Thank you.
Yes, Jai. So here we find there's been a flow, right? So in text 32, we heard about the punishment, right? They have this terrible punishment. And Arjuna wonders, well, if they know about the punishment, then surely they'll try to avoid the punishment. And then Krishna says, actually, well, even if they know to avoid the punishment, actually, Mrugank, if you can write down this chain of logic. So in text 32, he's explaining there's a punishment, right? For not acting according to this teaching, right? They are to be considered befooled and they are ruined in their endeavors, right? They have ruination. And then so Arjuna, he thinks, oh, well, if they're going to be ruined, then surely everyone would follow those injunctions. And then in text 33, Krishna says, I'll just let Mrugank write that down. But then in text 33, Krishna says no, because they are conditioned, right? Those who are conditioned against following my injunctions, they can't help but resist it, right? They will always not follow it. But then Arjuna says, well, then what's the point of the injunctions at all, right? What's the point of having these injunctions if they can't follow them? And then we find there are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One thing you'll notice, How does the text begin? Indriyasya, indriyasya. The word indriya is mentioned twice, right? Indriyasyendriyasyarthe. Indriyasya is mentioned twice, once for raga and the next time for dvesha, right? Raga, dvesha, attachment and aversion. And this is what we were discussing before, right? Attachment and aversion, they are the two sides of the same coin. We'll find this later on. One is revolted by attachment and one is also revolted by aversion. But we should never really be revolted by anything, because anything and everything in this world can be used in the service of Krishna, right? So it is attachment and aversion that are bad, right? It is nothing inherently in of itself. And so what does Krishna say? He says there are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. So he says these injunctions, this is the yoga ladder, right? He's saying these injunctions are given in the yoga ladder so that even though these people, they cannot follow the highest instructions, they are constantly being given injunctions so that they can slowly purify themselves. This is his response to Arjuna's questions. So that's why we have, what is the nature of the person who is following the karma kanda injunctions of the Vedas? What is the nature of him, right? He is regulated sense gratification. And then eventually the regulated sense gratification becomes well-regulated work, renouncing the fruits, right? At least partially, and then fully, like that it develops, right? So this is just another yoga ladder text. Okay, and then we find this, and then Arjuna, lastly, he asks, well, if this is the case, then why can't I just adopt somebody else's duty, right? Because all these duties are given by you. And then we come to a very, very famous text. All of us would have heard this one before. Shreyan swadharma vigunnaha paradharmat swanushthitat swadharme nidhanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. And then maybe we can have, what should we have? Maybe we can have, is Śrikānta Sena Prabhu still in the call? I think he's disappeared, had a disappearance. So then let's have then Nitai Prabhu. Let's hear from you.
Text 35, yeah?
Yeah.
It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though fatality, than other duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duty, for to follow another's path is dangerous.
Jai. So I'm sure we've all heard this text before somewhere or another, right? People love to quote it. It's a real, it's another, just be yourself because no one else can be, sort of text. But it's actually much deeper than that. Many people use it that way, but again, read in context, the Gita is much more profound than just a set of inspirational texts. So Krishna there, in this whole section, I've just gone quickly through it just to give the general flow, because what his point is he's concluding now his argument, right? He's concluding it. Do these activities, do them in this way. So 31 is describing doing them, right? And then now he's describing the series of, again, why they must be done, right? People have this conditioned nature, right? And therefore people should be elevated. He's responding to Arjuna's questions even, we could say, right? And so in this way, he has defined the conclusion of the Gita, as Srila Prabhupada says. And it does apply to Nishkama Karma Yoga. All of these things apply, right? But there is a deeper level that our acharyas will go to. And they'll say this also indirectly. Now, is really glorifying bhakti, right? Text 35, in many ways, it parallels 1866, Sarva Dharman Parityaja, Mamekam Sharanam Braja, Ahantwan Sarva Papebhyo, Moksha Yashyami Mashrujaha. In many ways, it actually echoes this. And we will come to that in a second. But first, we should discuss, right, the principle of it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duty, even though falsely, than in others' duties perfectly, right? So the idea is, even if you mess up, even if you don't fully succeed, still do your duty, A, to set the better example, B, to actually have performed them, right? If you're at the level of needing to perform them, right? But the reason why this can also apply to bhakti, right, is on the one hand, we read this as him saying, therefore be a kshatriya, therefore fight in the battle, right? That's what we're hearing. Fight in the battle. But what it also can mean, and what is indicated is svadharma means, what are we truly? Higher, deeper, more profoundly than we are these bodies. If you read the first chapter of Jaiva Dharma, and maybe we'll discuss this later on, there's actually different types of dharma, right? There is the duty, do your duty, right? Be a warrior. But this is not a permanent duty. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he compares it to ice, right? When ice is cold, when water is cold, it becomes ice. And when water is warm, it becomes water, right? And therefore its nature is different. What it does is different. When water is cold, it is solid, right? It is solid. And when it is solid and non-moving. But when water is warm, it is liquid and it is flowing, right? So this is an example of something whose dharma is not permanent. It is temporary dharma. It is not dharma as it actually is. And this is what is to be a kshatriya, right? This is naimitika dharma, right? Temporary dharma. But what is Krishna talking about here? He's talking about swadharma, right? And here there is a hint. Swadharma means one's true dharma. Of course, it can also mean the dharma that is one's job to do in society, but even deeper, it can mean bhakti. Because what is the true nature of the soul? The true nature of the soul, the true dharma, the one which never changes, right? The inherent duty that all beings have is to be a devotee. Jiber Swarup hoy Krishner Nitto Das. This is the true nature of the soul. This is the true dharma of the soul, right? And therefore, we can take this even deeper. We can say, do not worry about all of the other dharmas that you have to do, right? Do not worry about all of the other things, right? Like the Atmarati, you are satisfied in your devotional service. You are satisfied in this. This principle, when taken to its full conclusion, means don't worry about the execution of all these other dharmas, of all these other responsibilities. And this was the point I was making at the beginning. Do not read these chapters and think, therefore, I'm going to become a karma kandi, right? Do not think I'm going to become somebody who is now practicing karma yoga. Don't worry, even in your imperfect execution of Krishna consciousness, right? You are fully acting on the platform of the soul, right? Now, it's still good to know all of these things in order to engage people properly, right? And Srila Prabhupada, the way he's given us the Bhagavad-gītā as it is, he's applied all of these things to Krishna consciousness, even though Krishna is mainly describing karma yoga. As Srila Prabhupada himself said, the devotee is more merciful than the Supreme Lord himself. And therefore, we find that Prabhupada, he applies all of this to bhakti, right? But we shouldn't think then in our discussions, oh, this karma kanda, that, no. We should remember this text, swadharma. We should do our duty, right? We should do our true duty, which is to be a servant of Krishna. All of the other sacrifices, everything it is fulfilled, right? It is fulfilled by practicing Krishna consciousness. And therefore, sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo moksha yashyami ma shukchaha. Do not worry if you have completed him imperfectly, ma shukchaha, right? Like in 1866. Just perform this Krishna consciousness. Rely on me, right? Become my devotee. This is the internal meaning of these verses. Okay, so far so good. Any questions? Okay, so, and we can find this, again, hints of this, right? There's slight hints of this. Nityam, and also in text 32, what do we find, right? What is he saying? Sorry, not in text 32, in text 33, he says Jnanavan, right? Even those with knowledge, right? They will struggle and falter a bit, right? Even those with knowledge they do. So here we can find, even though this whole chapter in Krishna's words, right, directly, they are speaking out against, they're speaking out for karma, right? And karma, again, we should have it stuck in our head. Karma means jnana, right? Even though he's speaking for karma and therefore for jnana, here we find this subtle, there's a subtle downplaying of jnana, right? Even a man in knowledge, even he acts according to his own nature. But this way is even higher. So here we find bhakti is really starting to come out, right? Before there was only slight hints, one word here, one word there. This description here, even though it's technically describing Nishkama Karma Yoga in Krishna's words, it has the subtext. It has the implied meaning of bhakti, and that is being pulled out. And as we know, Srila Prabhupada, he's so merciful, he pulls out this conclusion very fully in his Bhagavad-gītā as it is. Okay, so we will keep on going then. We've got 10 minutes. It is my fear that maybe we won't be able to finish the third chapter, but we are going to get very, very close. Okay, so now the remainder of the chapter now is a question that naturally comes up in Arjuna's mind regarding everything, because Krishna, he keeps on appealing to two things in his description. So maybe if we can put this on the notes, right? So text 36 to 43, the conclusion of the third chapter, it can all be summed up in one word, kama. Not karma, but kama, right? We know when when people with Australian accents, when they say karma, they'll say it like kama, right? They'll say kama, it's your karma, but we mean kama, right? Lust. So we have lust, and lust. This is the real. This is a question that naturally comes up from what Krishna has been discussing. Because what has Krishna been discussing? Raga dvesha, raga dvesha. Don't forget these words, raga dvesha. These are so essential to our understanding, right? And so raga dvesha, what are they defined by? They're defined by lust. So Arjuna, he asks, what do we hear? Text 36. Arjuna uvacha attakena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha annichannapi varshneya baladivva niyojitaha. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Shri Bhagavan uvacha kama esha krodha esha rajogunna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidyenam mihavairinam. Famous text, kama esha krodha esha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world. So here, Krishna, he is answering the question. Because Arjuna, he's wondering, right? So how does this come up? How does this come up? All of this raga dvesha, right? How are people engaged in such foolish activities like this, right? Why are they? Where does this lust arise from? And so Krishna, he says, well, where does this arise from? Like this impulsion. And then Krishna says, it is obviously lust, right? So what do we read here? It is born of the mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, right? So as we know, anger does come from passion, right? I mean, what am I saying? Lust does come from passion, right? Because passion is we want to enjoy things, we want to do things, right? So obviously when people hear lust, they always just think of sexual lust because that's the most powerful one, right? But karma here does not mean sexual lust. It's not just that Krishna, you know, he's just talking about illicit sexual desire. No, what he's talking about is all lust, right? You want a chocolate bar, boom, karma, you're there, right? If you want if you want to get a McDonald's burger or a GYG shredded mushroom burrito, boom, lust, karma, right? Gotcha. There we go. That's all of it is under lust, right? You want to sleep in? Actually, maybe that's not lust. But so lust is when you have this, it's not just a sexual thing. In English and also in Sanskrit, like when people say kam, they often mean like sexual lust, but it's not just sexual. It's all lust whenever you lust towards something. And it comes from the mode of passion because the mode of passion is active, right? Everything gets done because of lust. All of today's society now runs not because of love, as much as we would wish, but because of lust, right? I want this, I want that, right? You go into the CBD, I forgot his name now, the famous book distributor. I always forget his name. Anyways, one of the world famous book distributors, he was visiting Sydney and he visited the CBD in Sydney, Pitt Street. And he was in Pitt Street, for those of you who know Sydney. And he said, this is the bottom of the barrel. Yes, Navina Nirada Prabhu. I always forget his name. He said, this is the bottom of the barrel of the whole world for book distribution. This is the least developed consciousness I've ever seen in my life. He said, seeing Pitt Street, everyone running up and down, right? Because everyone there is just consumed in lust, you know, lust to climb up the ladder, lust to get this, you know, you see the stores, everyone's there and all those, like, you know, I don't know the brands, you know, Gucci and all these other brands, right? Everyone is lusting after these clothes and everyone's there working hard, you know, running around, you know, I'm lusting for this money and that promotion and this and that. And all of that lust is just pouring out everywhere, right? And you see that when people are walking, try stopping somebody to give them a book, right? It's not like normal people. Sometimes people say they're busy, but these people, they're so consumed in their lust, like you can see, like they're just completely shocked, right? That something will disturb their drive, right? Anyway, so we find, and then later, wrath comes from that. Wrath does not come from the mode of passion. Sometimes we think, oh, it's very passionate to be angry, but anger is actually in the mode of ignorance. So what is the point being made here? That if your mode of passion is not channeled properly, what will happen? You go into the lower modes of ignorance, not into the higher modes. Passion that is channeled properly, that'll make you go up into the mode of goodness, right? But passion channeled incorrectly makes you go into anger, right? Because it naturally happens, right? You want something, you don't get it. And then what happens? You get angry. The younger of us will know about incels. That's literally what an incel is, right? They have lots of lust for sexual gratification and they don't get it. And then they enter into ignorance and they just become these angry people. But we see this all the time, right? People, even people don't get what they want, right? And then they fall into anger and then they fall into ignorance, right? Even with little children, you see it, right? Little children, they want some toy or something, and then the parents say no, right? And what happens? Do little children sit down and say, well, actually, you know what? I can't get everything in the world. This is just the way things are. I should learn to be renounced. I should know, you know, does the little child start going raga dvesha? No, the little child gets angry, right? Falls into anger because our lust frustrated becomes anger, and anger is a symptom of ignorance. Why? Because passion, foolish as it is is still productive, but ignorance is non-productive. Ignorance is destructive. That's why I stopped myself from saying sleeping a lot is passionate. It's not. It's sense gratification, but it's ignorant sense gratification. Because you're not getting anything from it, right? Sleeping in, you know, doping around, even watching TV, that's in the mode of ignorance, right? You're not doing anything, right? The mode of passion, again, is like grinding out your career or something, which in contemporary society we're led to believe is Shuddha Sattva. But no, it's passion. It's not very elevated. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the lesson. I'm going to go all the way up to 12 o'clock to today. So I'm just going to say the next shlok. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to call it a wrap there. It'll probably take us 5-10 minutes to finish this chapter next week. I was going to try gun out as much as possible, but if we're going into next week, we may as well. We will continue the lust section again, 5-10 minutes into next week. We'll have activities again next week. And then we will hopefully get around halfway through chapter 4. I'm picking up the pace for these last few sections. I'll quickly say the homework before I could tell you all that you can leave. I told you all to read until text 10, if I remember correctly. So the homework then for this week is to read up to text. Is telling you all to read up to text 33 too much, maybe? No, I'm going to tell you, please read up. I'm going to give a bit more reading than I normally do. There's no other activity to do. Read up to text 33. Okay, so that's the homework. Yeah. And once we start getting into the later chapters, remember how I asked you all to block it out. When we get into the later chapters, I'm actually going to ask people to share their blocking out. I won't do it for this chapter, but just as a heads up, if you haven't been doing that, get in the habit of it, because we'll start sharing those. Because I want you all to, I've shown you how to break things down, but I want you all to develop that way of thinking, especially for the later text. So soon, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so read up until text 33. It's not that hard. Chapter 4 is not that long. Yeah, read up until text 33, practice shlokas. I'd say start practicing your shlokas. Don't worry about the closed book test yet. Spend your time doing shlokas and doing the readings. Closed book test, you can start worrying about like in 2 weeks or so, I would say, then start. And don't worry too much. Just look at the questions. And if you don't know the answers to them, just slowly make sure you know them. That's all. Any questions then before we wrap up?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, sorry, I just joined 5 minutes late. Did I miss any announcement? Or,
let me just try to remember what I started with. I don't think so. I think it was just that I was just telling everyone to get on top of their shlokas, because shlokas, they're not hard, like they're only a few minutes every day, but because it's pure memorization, you know, you should do it in advance. It's hard to remember that much info in one go. And I was saying, because we're about, I was thinking we had finished chapter 3, but we were only a few minutes off. Because we're finishing now, we're getting towards the end of the module. The next few chapters are going to go much faster than the first 3 did. So we're actually we're more than halfway to the end of module 1. So I was saying we should start getting a little conscious of the closed book test and the shloka test. That was really it.
okay, thank you, Prabhuji.
And yeah, the closed book test questions, they're all in the handbook. So if you just check in the handbook, I won't ask anything that's not covered in the handbook, closed book questions. When I did Bhakti-śāstrī, they also put the questions from the analogies as a list of analogies. And so you had to memorize all the analogies as well. And I might do that for later ones, but I won't do that for this closed book exam. Just the ones from the closed book test.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Okay, any other questions, any difficulties, any questions for anything? The test, the Gita, anything in your own personal reading? I'm fine to take any other questions, otherwise we'll wrap up. Okay, Hare Krishna, thank you all for turning up. Please do the homework. If you haven't got your assessment in, please get them in by the end of this week. I will get marks back to you at some point. Don't worry. And yeah, I'll see you all next week then, and we can really dive into chapter 4, which is very exciting. Chapter 4 is probably my favorite of the first 6, besides chapter 6. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
glories,
Thank
all
you,
glories to Srila
Prabhuji.
Prabhupada. Okay, Hare Krishna.